And it is that while the lethality of their power is greater than ever, their capacity to impose control over the politically awakened masses of the world is at a historical low. Namely, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people, literally. It was easier to control 1 million people than physically to kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people.
The smoke in the air of our Concord bridges and Pearl Harbors is always smelled first by the farmers who come from their simple homes to find the fire and fight.
If you embark on instituting a society where government protects you from yourself, you're in big trouble, and that's what they're doing. That's all government is force. I mean, do you have a choice about paying Medicare taxes? This government uses force to mold behavior or mold the economy. They've overstepped the bounds, and they violated the whole concept of our revolution and our Constitution.
Welcome, everybody, to this Friday edition of the Freedom Link here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. I'm Joe Joseph, along with my good buddy Tim Watts and John King. Guys, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Joe.
Hey, guys. Good evening.
Hey, good evening. So tonight our special guest is Mr. Dutch Merrick, Hollywood filmmaker, NRA firearms instructor. Dutch, welcome aboard. It's so great to have you back.
Well, Joe, it's a pleasure to be back. I enjoy your show, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, man, the pleasure is all mine indeed. And, you know, being an NRA instructor like you are, a lot of the news lately, especially the response to Sandy Hook, has got to be troubling for you, I'm sure. You know, before we get into some of these issues, what was your first thoughts when you saw that occur?
Well, you know, when you see a tragedy like that occur, you realize, well, yet another one. You know, it's not unique in American society. And then the second, you know, the first reaction is, this is a horrible thing. People died. This is terrible. And then the second reaction, as a gun owner and a firearms rights advocate, I think, all right, what's going to be the backlash? Now, the last several mass shootings we haven't had a significant backlash, or a backlash that really had any bite to it, but this one obviously does. This one has Washington ready to react, as it were.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Dianne Feinstein, of course, is one of those people that, I don't know, always force this down our throats. You know, she's one of them. And what's interesting, Dutch, is she's a concealed carry, has a concealed carry permit, has carried in the past. Probably, I don't know if she still does. Most of these people in Washington oftentimes have armed guards. So why is it okay for them, but it's not okay for us?
Well, it's interesting. This country has, the leadership has a sense of arm us, disarm you. And, you know, this is an issue with a lot of nuance. There's a lot of gray area in here, and that's where the details get caught up. I remember after 1996, I think it was, when Bill Clinton passed I think it was the Domestic Terror Act as a knee-jerk response to the Oklahoma City bombing. In that was an opportunity to up-arm all federal facilities. At that time, suddenly they armored all the federal buildings. I live in the L.A. area, and we have two significant federal buildings, and both of them put in permanent concrete installations around it so you couldn't, drive a vehicle into it. Cameras went up. But what was less noticeable to the people were many federal agencies then became armed to the teeth. And I'm talking agencies like postal inspectors, tax collectors, suddenly were buying up semi-automatic assault rifles and pistols. You didn't hear a lot about that. And then locally here, I don't know if it's a state law, but if you use body armor in the commission of a crime, it exponentially raises the penalty. And at the same time, all the police are issued body armor. So we're going to up-arm while you disarm at the local and national level.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. it's very hypocritical. You know, one of Ron Paul's ads I remember during the election cycle was serial hypocrisy, because that seems to be all you get out of Washington. You know, do as I say, not as I do. And it's funny because Business Insider reported on a letter that was written to Miss Feinstein from a veteran. He just got out of the Marine Corps in 2012. His name is Joshua Boston. And he wrote this letter. He said, "Dear Senator Feinstein, I will not register my weapons should this bill be passed, as I do not believe it is the government's right to know what I own. Nor do I think it's prudent to tell you what I own so that may be taken from me by a group of people who enjoyed armed protection, yet decry me having the same a crime. You, ma'am, have overstepped a line that is not your domain. I am a Marine Corps veteran of 8 years, and I will not have some woman who proclaims the evil of an inanimate object, yet carries one, tell me I may not have one. I'm not your subject. I am the man who keeps you free. I'm not your servant. I'm the person whom you serve. I'm not your peasant. I'm the flesh and blood of America. I'm the man who fought for my country. I'm the man who learned. I am an American. You will not tell me that I must register my semi-automatic AR-15 because of the actions of some evil man. I will not be disarmed to suit the fear that has been established by the media and your misinformation campaign against the American public. We, the people, deserve better than you. Respectfully submitted, Joshua Boston." So, Dutch, what do you think about that? I mean, I thought that he pretty much struck a nerve, I'm sure, with a lot of veterans and a lot of gun owners out there, because he kind of says everything that we want to say. I know it resonated with me.
Well, yeah, it was an articulate letter for sure. I think he really drove home a point. And this issue, like so many issues, is broader than, it's not as narrow as we would like it to be. It's not as easy to just put your thumb on it and solve it. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges that I think we find in the United States is there's a concept of fear that's instilled in us through the media and through the leadership. And the concept of fear is that of our neighbors. We're constantly told that my next-door neighbor is going to take what I have away. You know, he's going to rape my daughter. He's going to go in my kitchen and steal my food. He's going to take my job. And it doesn't matter if he's Mexican or a Muslim or the white guy down the street. I need to be afraid at all times. When in reality, it's the job of the power elite to keep us scattered like that and keep us afraid of each other. When we all actually have the same values and the same purpose, generally speaking, we need to remember that it's us against them. It's us, the people. We, the people. And there's a sense of individualism that, you know, when you watch the news report and there's some guy holed up in his house, armed to the teeth, all alone, and they send in a SWAT team and a tank, the guy's done. There's no getting out of that. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts.
Right.
But that's not the point of being armed in a free society in the Second Amendment. The point of being armed in the context of the Second Amendment is that collectively we represent a defensive threat against power. Collectively, when in my neighborhood there's 5 or 10 people that are armed to whatever extent, it's going to be a lot harder for the jackbooted thugs, in the traditional parlance, to come in and have their way with us. You know, there's a sense of collective, we're all in this together. And that's what I like to emphasize to people is your neighbor's not out to get you. The guy in the suit in Congress who's going to send the local law enforcement to barge down your door, they're out to get more from you than your neighbor.
No, you're absolutely right. You know, Andrew Jackson said, 1 million armed freemen possessed of the means of war can never be conquered. You know, it's funny how this fight against the Second Amendment, it wages on, but really there's, you know, they say, well, you know, we have to interpret it based on this criteria or whatever, and judicial precedent, yada, yada, yada. But you can go back and look what the Founding Fathers said about the Second Amendment and the need to be armed. And, you know, I've heard the argument, especially from a lot of the left-leaning publications, about, how it's outdated, it's obsolete, that, times have changed. It's funny, but, although times have changed, I think the values, the core values of this country still remain intact. I think that people are sadly misinformed and uninformed because, Chuck Woolery was on last night. He talked about how the mainstream media has become kind of Goebbels-esque, if you will. How it kind of mimics World War II Germany in that it's become a propaganda machine for the control freaks, for the powers that be. Do you feel that way too?
Well, yeah. There is essentially, I think Chuck Woolery coined a really key phrase when he said blaming guns for that shooting is like blaming airplanes for 9/11. To me, that really rang true, and I earned a new respect for Chuck Woolery. I hadn't thought of him in that context ever. When you look at one element, if you look at the guns in this shooting and try to blame the guns, or worse yet, try to say that removing guns is going to solve the problem, you're really in fantasy land. But it's easy for people to get their head around and say, oh, yeah, well, if that kid didn't have an AR-15 clone, he would not have done what he did. Well, that's malarkey. Or they would say, well, he wouldn't have been as effective, and he would have had to change magazines more, or yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, they can always find a reason, can't they?
Well, the bottom line is that is absolutely irrelevant in the bigger picture. And let me back up a step here and widen out to a little broader view of things. As you know, I work in film and television.
Absolutely.
One of the TV shows that I've worked on for a long time deals with murder. Every single episode has a murder or two. And most of TV will be talking about a murder, investigating a murder, showing a murder, having a trial about a murder. Now, murder is antithetical to the human condition. It's not in our core makeup. Yeah, for centuries, man has killed man with some reason, but in your village, you don't just walk over to your neighbor and kill him. It's not in our best interest. Our best interest is to make sure our neighbor is healthy in the tribe so that we can all build the house together and provide food, and we look out for our neighbor's health. Yet on TV, there are federal laws that say the human body cannot be seen unclothed. I cannot see a penis, a vagina, a mammary, a breast. You can't even say those words in a lot of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So my body's not safe to see on TV. I cannot see how people are created, so you can't see people making love or humping. That's forbidden. There's a moral code. Please, you can't see that.
You said humping.
Right? Now, the one act that we all share was breastfeeding. The first thing we did as a little baby was breastfeeding. You're not allowed to show that on television. And
most males still continue that to this day. Right?
Exactly. I did it when I was 16. I had to kick it. But now those are federally mandated laws that I can show murder. Now, they'll regulate how many murders per hour you can see, or what hour of the day you can see more murders. But they say you can see murder, but you can't see life created. Now let's just start there. That's a core of what generations and generations of Americans are growing up seeing. If you add to that the layer of kids that are now being prescribed drug company drugs, they're making billions on these kids taking Ritalin and whatever prescriptions they have to level out their attitudes. Kids haven't changed. Kids were just the same 50 or 100 years ago. They were just kids. And we cope with that, and they learn. Now we're putting them on drugs, and they're getting all screwed up in the head. Combine that with an economy that has their parents scared to death because they can't afford the piano lessons and the ballet and the new car to keep up with the Joneses, and everyone's panicked. They're working 2 and 3 jobs if they can get a job. And then you raise a kid who, from the time he was early enough to play on a computer, watch a TV, they parked him in front of the electronic babysitter because the parents had 2 jobs. Now this kid's playing a first-person shooter game at the age of 6 or 7 when he doesn't have the moral awareness of what's real and what's not, and you're conditioning to splatter the brains of aliens or hookers or soldiers whatever you're doing, you're giving them that hand-eye coordination, trigger, 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 kill, kill, kill. You put all that into one big picture, and then someone tries to say we're going to blame the guns.
That's right. You know, and what's interesting about that is that DARPA created those first-person shooter games with the specific intent of reducing the hesitation factor of soldiers in the field, because what they were coming to find out is soldiers didn't want to pull the trigger. So this was a way to help dehumanize the other side by, you know, putting them in front of a video game, and now all of a sudden they can pull the trigger because they're not really killing somebody, you know. And
the term I like, objectify. They turn the person into an object.
Yes, very good. Yeah, that's an excellent term. So, I mean, there really has, you know, in this country, in the world for that matter, over the last 100 years or so, been a dehumanization campaign too, where, you know, we're really lost touch with our humanity. Don't you think, Dutch?
Well, it's framed in the way that it's us versus them. And it's interesting, the people that framed this country, that founded this country and even came up with the name, a lot of people in shorthand refer to the United States of America, which is the full name, as the U.S., which is visually us, which you learn that when you're a little kid, that the word us is you and me and not them, and it automatically distances us from the other. And the other could be the guy over on the Mexican side of the border. The other could be the Russians on the other side of the planet. It's us versus them, and there's no push to say what connects us. How are we actually the same? But we're actually, I think, as a species, we are gaining in empathy. And I think this is an important point to make. There's a professor and author named Jeremy Rifkin, and he's written books on sociology and human condition. And he's got a video that people can look up on YouTube. There's a YouTube page called RSA, Romeo Sierra Alpha. It's the Royal Scientific Academy, and they do these videos where they get top speakers and intellectuals, and then they animate them with a hand sort of drawing them sped up in front of the camera. And they're very clever to listen to the talk and have the artist's interpretation of what they're saying. So Jeremy Rifkin did a video on an empathic civilization, and he shows the course of mankind, and he demonstrates that as a species, and they tested this with monkeys and then humans and then other animals, we're literally hardwired to have empathy. And I'm sure you can think of a time when you saw someone fall and hit their butt on the ground and you kind of wince, you kind of jerk from it, because in a sense you're feeling the sensation. Or if someone is across the room from you and a little spider goes up their arm and they kind of tingle, you feel that. That is an electric stimulus, essentially, that we are connected. Now, Jeremy Rifkin points out something very interesting here, that our ability for empathy started out with the family unit. When you go back, tens of thousands of years, millions of years, I don't know, you're born as a baby, you develop an empathy for your parents and your siblings because you grow up with them, and that was where our capacity of empathy ended. Anything outside of your family was the other. Then it evolved to everyone in your village. Now, if there's 150 people in your village, they were us, and everyone else was them, and you had an empathy for them. So when someone else in your village was attacked, you would defend them because you'd feel it. You'd really have a sense of connection to them. The next layer of that became national. So let's say if you're an Irishman and the next guy over is an Irishman, you're going to relate to him. Hey, we're both Irishmen. Let's go get the British, or the English, I should say. Now that has evolved till, you're a Catholic, I'm a Catholic. We're all on this together. Let's go get the Jews or the Muslims or whatever. So he points out to a trajectory that shows that man's capability for empathy is growing. And it's growing, I think, during our generation. So while the powers that be in the media are telling us that we're all out to get each other, I find more and more people, when you see flash mobs form or you see the Occupy movement where thousands of people all show up from different walks of society that never knew each other and all show up with the same common cause and go, let's stick it to Washington. I go, wow, it's happening before our eyes, this capacity for empathy.
That's a great point. Go ahead, Timmy.
Dutch, your point about violence in the media, something that you're very close to, in TV and the movies is absolutely right on. And you notice when NRA spokesman Wayne LaPierre came out, and he had his press conference, and he talked about the fact that, the violence comes from television, video games, and the like, movies. What did the media do? The media excoriated him for a point that's altogether spot on and very valid. And it's just very hypocritical, again, noting, yourself in the industry like you are, you can recognize this, and yet all these other people in the news side, they don't want to admit, the elephant that's in the room.
Yeah, well, they're paid to have a particular agenda, and they've got to stick to their story. Now, and let me offer you this, because as part of this sort of yin and yang, if you're familiar with the yin and yang in the Zen tradition, if you look at it, there's sort of a circle with an S in the middle, and one portion is white, the other portion is black, and they're kind of chasing after each other. But within each of those portions is a spot in the middle with the opposite color. And what that represents is that in all things possesses the opposite, if that makes sense to you. And by that, I wanted to demonstrate that I am a benefactor member of the NRA. I'm proudly so, but I've seen the NRA leadership play the scare card recently, and whether it's to increase membership or to increase gun sales or to increase our fear, I don't know. I do appreciate their efforts to protect my right to own a gun, but I don't want them scaring me needlessly of something that's not there. So I agree with Wayne LaPierre very much in his pointing out about the media, but the trajectory, the arc that they've had in the last several years of they're coming to get you, that doesn't resonate with me, because as I said, I think we are actually gaining in empathy, and that divisiveness, mostly it's within our political leaders, the highest leaders that say, they're out to get us. Vote with me because they're going to screw you. Well, we all know that if I vote with candidate number A, letter A, we're only doing it because we're afraid B is going to screw us worse, but we knew A is going to screw us to begin with.
Yeah, amen to that. You're absolutely right, Dutch. Let me stop you there because we're up against a hard break. And when we come back, we'll have the King's Court and then much more with Dutch Merrick. As the Freedom Link continues, I'm going to talk a little bit about some police state matters that make the Second Amendment just so much more important. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. Orion Talk Radio has started a new petition on the whitehouse.gov website calling for all gun bans to also apply to law enforcement, including federal, state, and municipal agencies, as well as domestic military and U.S. intelligence agencies. Please help us to fight all gun bans and large-capacity magazine clip restrictions for we the people. Go to the front page of OrionTalkRadio.com and sign the petition today. This is about protecting our highly treasured right of the Second Amendment. And at Orion Talk Radio, we're fighting hard to keep it. Joe Joseph here, along with Tim Watts and John King. Our special guest, Hollywood film producer and filmmaker Dutch Merrick. Before we get back to Dutch, though, I think it's time to call the King's Court into session. John King, take it away.
It's soon going to become clear as to why they want to take your guns. The debt ceiling is going to be addressed in February. Republican and Democrats are now starting to draw lines in the sand. Some say it may be even necessary to partially shut down the government to save money. No junk mail on Saturday would be nice. The secret word will be austerity. Although you may never hear it, that word would be like saying the dreaded N-word. You will hear softer words such as cuts and downsizing, but never austerity. The American people will no doubt take it in the anus, as the defense spending will be addressed as well, as it was kicked down the road from the January fiscal cliff. The automatic answer is tax the people. Never clean up waste or end a war that eats $40 million of taxpayer money a day. Look for prices to increase and the markets to go wild, especially in the precious metals. If you call your ass a rose, it will still smell like crap. Austerity is austerity, no matter how you cut it. There's nothing you can do because the government doesn't give a rat's ass. That's reality in your face. There's nothing you can do, so take my advice. Just pull down your pants and slide on the ice. Court adjourned.
Thank you, John King. And, of course, copyright MASH 1977. But, hey, no.
Yes, sir, Dr. Stanton Friedman.
That's right. If I wasn't such a MASH junkie, I wouldn't have known that. But I knew that, too. Now, it's funny you say that because, Dutch, you know, to just focus on this Second Amendment fight when the problem in this country is a lot more dynamic than that, you know. It makes you wonder if this isn't being done in tandem with other things because of the fact that you have this like a crossroads in this country where they're going to have to make some hard choices about the economy. What's interesting is that I don't think people equate the fact that they're on the hook for this stuff quite seriously. You know what I mean? I don't think they take it quite seriously. What's your thoughts on that? And do you think that the gun grab may be in like a preemptive to what may be coming with the fiscal situation?
Well, the general populace doesn't connect the federal budget with their own daily lives. I mean, it's almost impossible when someone talks about the number $13 trillion. How
unbelievable.
In your daily life, when you're making $60,000 or $80,000 or $20,000 a year, I've got $100 in my pocket, and someone starts to use the word trillion, it's lost on me. So people are baffled and bedazzled by these numbers, and they've lost their relevance. What John King had said about austerity struck me as very relevant. We see what's going on in Greece, Ireland, Spain. These so-called austerity measures is essentially punishment for the people. It says that the billionaire bankers, as soon as they have a problem in their program, we're going to write a blank check to bail them out with no strings attached, no additional regulations. But when it comes to the people, you know what? We're going to take away grandma's Social Security that she paid into her whole life, or Medicare that you've been paying into and you've been promised you'd be taken care of at 65. When it comes to us, we're going to suffer, and that's where the rubber hits the road, and that's something that people need to be made clear. The mainstream media does not talk about how this is going to affect us. They just say, well, what percentage are we going to cut Medicare? They don't say, why do we need to? They don't say, why don't we cut the military budget or maybe reduce some of the really frivolous spending. It's a matter of which grandmother is going to lose her money first. And those are the people that you don't actually hear interviewed, the people that are literally losing their Medicare, losing their Social Security.
No, absolutely. You're totally right there, and such a valid point. You know, we pay into this system that, for example, Social Security, why it goes into a lockbox. Yeah, well, the problem is the lockbox has 535 keys to it.
There's trillions of dollars been loaned out of that lockbox.
Amen to that. No, you're right.
If they wipe out any portion of Social Security, all they're trying to do is write off their own debt, the checks that they wrote out of our money that we put in, that we paid for.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. John King, you have a comment?
Yes, as far as the extra taxes and stuff, just by cleaning up the waste in the medical field for that the taxpayer pays for medicine, it's 40 cents of every dollar is wasted. If we could clean that up, we wouldn't need to be taxed for Obamacare. It would pay for itself just by cleaning up the 40 cents for every dollar that's wasted.
You make a great point, John. You know, Dutch, one of the latest figures out of the Congressional Budget Office was that Medicare annually, with waste, fraud, and abuse, waste on average $60 billion a year. That's $600 billion over 10 years. I mean, think about how many mouths could that feed? You know what I mean? How many homeless could come off the street with just that money wasted? You know, or education. Yeah, if you're hell bent on doing public education, think about what that money could do for that. You know, all these things can happen, but not when you're wasting $600 billion over 10 years, and that's for one government program.
Well, I was in the hospital recently with a little injury from a car accident, so I have my own insider view recently from being within our medical system. On my medical bill when I was in the hospital, I had gotten an aspirin as part of my care, and the charge for the aspirin was $35. And I asked the doctor, I said, well, doesn't it seem ridiculous that the hospital charges $35 for this aspirin? And so he jumped in to defend it, to say that, well, you know, costs are so that they've got to make it up somewhere. Well, I went to the local drugstore, one of the major chain drugstores where you figure you'll get the better price, perhaps, and I needed to buy some gauze and a little roll of 3-inch wide gauze just to wrap a wound. You know, it's probably 2 feet of gauze. I wouldn't have imagined myself would have cost more than 29 cents to make, and I figured that maybe they retail it for $1.29, and okay, they've made their money. But it's $4.50 per roll of this stuff that I needed a bunch of rolls. And I said, $4.50? I even asked the pharmacist at the store, I said, why is this $4.50? And she said, maybe it's a typo. Let me look it up. She goes, no, that's right. And I had to buy a lot of this over a month or so, and I'd been to a lot of different stores. And that's just the gauze, just at a retail location, that it didn't cost near that much to make. There's a level of gouging at every level of the healthcare system, from the drug companies that create a drug to get you addicted and then create a second drug to deal with the symptoms of the first drug, to aspirin maker, to the gauze, to the needles. Every step along the way, someone is padding their pockets, and the sum of that, what it equates to, is an absolutely unaffordable healthcare system. I listened to a report the other day that said that our healthcare outcomes is like number 47 out of the 200-something countries on the planet, number 47, and our costs are double the average developed country. So we pay double, and we're 47th in end result. And I understand that the fourth leading cause of death is doctor or hospital related, malpractice. So there's cancer, number 1, heart disease, number 2, and I think it was number 3 was medical system-related deaths. That's unacceptable. But the news doesn't bother to report it. You know, the NPR station, they said, hey, thank you, this article is brought to you by Merck. And you wonder why you didn't happen to hear about the gouging or the people dying for lack of health care.
Yep.
Greed has taken over. Greed has absolutely taken over this country. And the mentality of people that work in a body like a board of directors of a hospital or an insurance company, nobody takes individual responsibility. Hey, we're working as a team. We're trying to make near quarter profits as much as we can this quarter to show higher profits over last year, and nothing else counts. All humanity could die away. You lose your entire customer base, but as long as I made more money this quarter, I get my bonus.
Yep. Dutch, you and I both know that there was a plan out there that would have addressed a lot of this, and that's where you and I met on the media team for Dennis Kucinich. And, I've brought this up to a lot of folks. I'm thinking we need to do a show some night to tell people what this whole is, Joe and I, have tried to coin it, properly, not Obamacare, but insurance care, what this was actually all about. The fact that the big HMOs and all the insurance carriers spent over $1 million per day to obfuscate the entire healthcare debate. They talked about 5 different plans, none of which, addressed the entire problem of exorbitant profits, 33% of $1 trillion per year going to profit, not covering costs, but covering profit. And there was one plan that was going to eradicate all of that. And it was out for a long time, H.R. 676. And the minute that started to gain steam, Dutch, across both sides of the aisle, suddenly that's when the health care debate came up, and the rich billionaires that were making that 33% of $1 trillion every year, they went, oh, no, we're not having that. Because H.R. 676 said, no, we're going to go back to a nonprofit-based system. You want to talk about H.R. 676 at all?
Well, I remember when Obama was talking about health care reform, and luckily that's a broad enough term that when he campaigns on health care reform without using specifics like single payer, health care reform resonated with the voters, and they thought, yeah, this means he's going to get us all health care, or he's going to get rid of the waste in the system. Everyone gave their own interpretation to these intentionally vague words that he used. And then his Republican opponents can certainly use the same term, health care reform, and to their constituents, they would interpret it to mean another thing. But when Obama actually started to have the meetings, he had invited 160-something members of the health care community to discuss in a task force the health care challenge. Now, of the 160-something people invited, nobody was there to talk on behalf of single payer, that's the elephant in the room. That was the obvious choice. You do what works in so many other countries. And every time you point out Canada and say, hey, they're all covered with health care, some clown's going to say, yeah, but I know a Canadian and he doesn't like their health care system. He comes here because he gets it faster. Well, they may know that guy. That may be true. But the majority of Canadians flat out love their system because no matter what, they're covered. Whether they have to wait or not, they walk into a hospital and they get fixed. And that's not just Canadians. That's the Japanese, the British, the Germans, the Italians. You name it. The developed world has that. So that's what Obama was not going to allow into the dialogue. And luckily a reporter, I forgot which news service, maybe the Mercury Sun, had pointed out that at that meeting there was no single-payer advocate scheduled. So at the last minute, he invited in John Conyers. So he had one voice on behalf of single payer out of 160-something, and it was a token. They didn't want to hear a thing about what they said, and this whole plan, even removing the possibility of a public option where there'd be someone in competition with the insurance companies, he wouldn't even hear that. And I remember as it was coming down to the wire, he was willing to make compromises with his Republican opponents, and so he made exactly 100 compromises in the direction of gutting health care. And in response to those 100 compromises to his Republican peers, they gave him 0 votes. So he handed them the keys to the castle and got nothing in return. And it's all playing a game of Punch and Judy. You're going to play the good guy today, and I'll play the bad guy. And meanwhile, the puppet master's got his hand in both of their asses telling them what to say.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And you brought up a great point about how, the $35 aspirin and how they tack on cost every step of the way. Very similar in structure to the VAT tax over in Europe and places like that where things are taxed, like, say, for 24% at every step of the manufacturing process until the product hits the shelf. And, in a sense, that is. It's a tax on the people. It doesn't need to be that much, but the fact is we pay for it. Your insurance premiums go up. I don't know how much your insurance premiums have gone up, Dutch, in the past couple of years, but I know that the year-over-year increases have been substantial. And Timmy says it right, insurance care is what it should be called because it's the insurance companies that wrote the legislation that Obamacare is based on. So I don't see many good things coming down the pipe as far as socialized medicine because as long as the insurance companies are involved and as long as you have corporatism merging with government, and that's basically what you have, then what do we've got? We've got fascism in this country, don't you think?
Well, at each level of government, when you have Timothy Geithner, the chairman of Goldman Sachs, directing securities and exchange policy, and you've got the head of Monsanto or one of his agents dealing with food regulation policy, and you've got the heads of the medical insurance companies dictating policy to Congress and giving them the verbiage through groups like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. Essentially, the leaders of corporate business are telling government what to do. And my understanding is that Mussolini had defined fascism, and I forget who this was, Tom Hartman or someone who was really outlining this very well, that, you know, Hitler was just a maniacal, evil person. He wasn't about fascism per se, but who was about fascism was Franco in Spain, and we tried to fight the fascists in the 30s, and Mussolini were out-and-out fascists. Mussolini defined fascism as corporate control of government. Boom. One small sentence. And that's what we have now. When the corporations dictate policy and they spend money on elections to get people that feel they have a perception of voting and participating. Most Americans think that when they cast a ballot once every 4 years, they hold their nose for a candidate they may or may not like, but at least they have a perception that they made the choice. And that's a psychological trick. When you tell your prisoner, do you want to take a bullet to the head or do you want to take the poison pill? Well, shit, I don't want either. I want to make my own decision. But at least they give the prisoner the chance to feel like they're part of the process, like they made the decision and their hands on the lever. And that's what they're offering us. This complete corporate control is no longer of, for, or by the people. We're no longer part of the process. We're just the chattel that they can earn off of our backs and tell us how to run our country.
Yeah, it's a good point, Dutch. You know, it's frustrating when you see people in the media. They try to throw out, you know, the terms socialism all the time. That we're going to socialism. We're going to socialism. Like, no, you know, let's really define it for what it is. And I think you just did very well. You know, it is indeed fascism. You know, this is corporate rule. This is rule by the oligarchs, rule by the rich. I can see no other way to color this other than just blatant fascism. So, you know, kudos to the point. Much appreciated.
Well, and on the word of media, I was thinking of a phrase when we were speaking during the break that, you know, we as a people, the American people, whatever people you think of, we are a product of our society. You know, we're affected by those around us, and it affects our decision-making and our behavior. But our society is a product of the media. The media tells us what's in fashion. It tells us how to vote. It puts pressure on us in whatever direction. It informs us, disinforms us, misinforms us. So unless we change the media, see, the media is not going to report on the riot going on down the street in your neighborhood, because if they did, you may want to jump out of your house and join them. You may think, hey, this is a good idea, or at least want to hear what these people are talking about. What do they have to say? Is this something I may want to know about? So instead, the media either shouts it down as a bunch of lunatics and they all should be arrested. They provide a judgment for you so you don't make up your own mind, or they just ignore it altogether as though nothing ever happened. You know, George Orwell's 1984 is like a perfect outline for what's going on. The doublespeak, where words have reverse meaning, and the reframing of everything, and the very tight control of information through a very small group that basically control all media.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Dutch. You know, and the last story, we only have a couple of minutes left, and I want to get your quick take on this, but apparently Homeland Security now is running a loan-a-drone program. What I find what it is loan-a-drone. Really, they loan them out to law enforcement agencies when they feel like they need a predator drone. When do you think is a good time for law enforcement in this country to have access to predator drones?
Well, I looked at a photograph the other day of one of the Occupy rallies, and there was a big police force out with police on horseback and uniform, and then I assume what would be their special weapons and tactics unit that were dressed in what looked to be Army-issue camouflage, and they had AR-15s or perhaps M16s and Kevlar helmets and the Oakley goggles, and they looked exactly like our troops abroad. They've got thermal imaging systems, the best in communications, helicopters. They've got armored vehicles. Our police have now become a military, which is the antithesis of posse comitatus. It's the antithesis of the American way. You don't militarize your police. You keep them local and separate and here for law enforcement, not war. These guys are dressed for war. And the drones have been demonstrated in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia to be a wonderful tool for those in power to have eyes in the skies to spy on everything everyone does, and a horrible thing for civil liberties and people. This country is based on the perception that we still have some freedom. That's why it hasn't totally collapsed. We're boiling a frog by raising the temperature in the pot 1 degree at a time, and we just don't.
You're absolutely right. Dutch, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. Folks, again, this Dutch Merrick, Hollywood filmmaker, and NRA firearms instructor. Dutch, thanks for coming on.
Joe and Tim and John, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to doing it again, and keep the powder dry.
Thank you. Popeye, down the rabbit hole.